Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Chris Andrew podcast. I had so much fun talking to Dr. Jamie Freestone all the way back in episode 1 that I've invited him back again. There are a few things that came up from that conversation that I want to follow up on, but one in particular has stood out, and I haven't prepped him at all on this, so I'm just going to throw him straight into the deep end. You'll love it. But before we get to that, thank you so much to my patrons for supporting the show. You can join if you want in backing us. It's less than the cost of a loaf of sourdough a month, and really just keep everything going. And you get to have a say on the guests, and there's some bonus content as well. Jump over to patreon.com/country. All right. Enjoy the show. So, Jamie, thank you so much for coming back onto the show. It was such a smash hit for me personally to have you on. The numbers were terrible, but I enjoyed it so much that I'm dipping back into the well. And it's kind of a topic that is, I think, one of many threads that naturally follows on from what we were talking about last time. But it's perhaps a bigger and more philosophical one. I'll get straight into it. I just to let you know, audience, that I'm totally ambushing Jamie here. If that explains the low quality answers that I get in response to these questions. I want to start by exploring today the idea that science is in trouble.
All right.
What do you think? Because it seems like replicability crises, which turn hurts legitimacy, which in turn hurts the consequences
Yeah.
of results, etc., across all disciplines, really. And there are other problems with funding and how we do it. What are the limits of the discipline itself? I want to look at what you think about some of these topics. Firstly, just the general idea. Do you think science is in a unique place at the moment to where it has been, and is that a place of trouble?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a unique place. I don't know if it's in. I mean, some parts of it are in trouble. I mean, I guess if you break it down by discipline by discipline, it's probably going to be very different answers for each one. Like the replication crisis. My understanding is that's mainly affecting some of the social sciences in particular, or what you might call more social sciences like psychology and behavioral economics and stuff like that. I don't think there's much of a replication crisis in like organic chemistry, where things are kind of cruising along quite nicely in the textbook.
Smugly.
Yes, smuggling. Yeah. And maybe they should be taken down a notch, the organic chemists. But like, the big picture science, is it in trouble? Maybe from like maybe not internally so much. Like if again, talk to people from certain disciplines where innovations are happening all the time, where stuff's going along nicely, probably not. But then maybe the general public has lost faith in science to an extent. Obviously, probably the last post-pandemic sort of 5 years or whatever have not seen a huge amount of confidence in epidemiology and public health, or the molecular biology involved in creating mRNA vaccines and stuff like that. But that is obviously, goes back to some political realities. It's not like people working on vaccines themselves are like struggling to come up with new ideas or anything like that. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess.
Are you sure that that's the case though? Because
No.
another element that I wanted to discuss was the way in which we do structure and fund science. There are many frontiers to be pushed at all times. Obviously, we know so little relative to how much there is potentially to know, or so it seems. And we need to be judicious about what we choose to pursue in the best interest of the species or knowledge itself. But it is very hard to attract resources to certain things. Say, for example, I'm as amateur as you could get to be making such commentary. But if we could put a little more time into fusion or even improving fission energy rather than say AI systems to guide drones to explode civilians or whatever,
Which is advancing really nicely, by the way.
It's advancing fantastically. It's mind blowing what they can do. I shouldn't have said those words. But like
Yeah.
there's not a strong case for the utility of one, and there's an extraordinarily strong case for the utility of the other. And yet, obviously, we know how inverted the funding
Mm.
ratios would be.
Actually, no, that's a good point. Yeah. So so if you look at this from a funding point of view, then yes, it seems like the incentive structure is all kind of out of whack. It's hard for me to speak about every part of the world, but like just using Australia as an example. Certainly, scientists here will complain about how funding is allocated. Having said that, they've always complained, and academics have
Yeah.
always complained about everything. But like it does seem like at the moment the warp priorities are particularly egregious. I mean, one here's one crazy idea that a guy I know used to advocate. He said that, and apparently there are some places that sort of do this or used to do it like this, but if you have like a university and a bunch of scientists, asking for funding for their various projects, one way to do it would just be that every single scientist or researcher gets a certain amount of funding, re- regardless of what kind of crackpot thing they're pursuing is. So that rather than trying to like pit people against each other and having people just like try and smush their research into one of the priority areas that the funders have said is important that year for some political reason, probably, and not even, a scientific reason, you just give everyone a kind of set research budget and then they just go away and see what they can do with that amount of money. And naturally, some people are just going to squander it on weird stuff, but you'll end up at least based on the premise that everyone who's gotten to the level of professor or the level of whatever level it is you set this at is somewhat sensible and must, be a legitimate researcher to have gotten to that stage. You give them some money and let them do what they want to do, and that way you don't have to go through the giant rigmarole of the funding applications. You don't sap scientists' time by making them spend 70% of their time on grant applications rather than actually doing the research, all that kind of thing. And I thought that was an interesting idea, which maybe speaks to how shit things are currently. That kind of just like very loose approach would actually be superior to the current one. So yeah, from a funding point of view, I think things could definitely be a lot better. But then then do how do you try and improve it if you don't do that crazy method I just outlined? Are you trying to have the private sector have more influence over what is funded so that uh, scientific developments are more marketable and we're focusing on things that have some market applicability, or do you try and make it so that the government has more say, so that society's views are represented more in what gets funded, or do you defer to expert bodies more because they're the ones who actually know what is possible and what's at the frontier and all that kind of thing? I don't know, but I do know that the current situation is terrible because if I was president for a day, yes, something like fusion research would probably get like a bit of attention because the potential upside of developing fusion power is so gigantic. Um, yeah, so a crisis in science. Yeah, maybe from a funding point of view, that's maybe a way to look at it. I don't know that much about the political realities of how science is funded. I've focused more on being a snarky critic of certain projects and a booster of others, rather than having much, actual practical knowledge of the political realities of how money gets
And wouldn't it be
transferred
nice
to
if you were
things.
given the nerd UBI to be able to pursue that fringe hobby of yours?
Nerd UBI, maybe that's better than
But
what I
it's
called
funny.
it.
I mean, just to go to your own example earlier
Mm,
of the mRNA
mm,
research, Kotlin Kariko, who spearheaded that and was awarded a Nobel Prize, I think, last year, she struggled to find anywhere to support, her research, and it seemed too fringe, and I don't know, maybe crackpot is too strong, but like she was continuously being steered in towards I guess the center, and it's really
mhm.
interesting when you in worlds of innovations, because the prevailing orthodoxy is probably as a norm the last place that you're going to find certain innovations, because
Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
it is that sort of outsider. If we already knew what it is that we were looking for, we would have found it.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I'm warming up to this now, Chris. I
That's
yeah.
good.
This is I
As I said, I've ambushed you.
that That is another good point. Yeah. So if you look at it from that point of view, um, yes, then science is in crisis. And I'll end there. But the idea that at the moment you are rewarded for chipping away and making an incremental improvement, or not even improvement, just a slight variation on existing research, probably that you've done, so that you're just kind of like, adding to a paper that you did last year. Because you are very much rewarded for doing that, because you can point to previous research and say, look at this, direction we're going in. Fund me to do a bit more of that with some slightly different keywords this time or whatever. Which is, a lot of people would say that's not scientific discovery. That is not the way to extend new knowledge. If you're doing that, you're almost by definition restricting yourselves to the non-innovative areas, because you're just doing the stuff that's kind of already been done, and maybe already been like um, had all the best stuff extracted from it. That is definitely true. And that goes back to how the funding works, but also probably a view of like the philosophy of science, or a view of just what science is and how knowledge is created. Because I think it's become normal across disciplines to see the way human knowledge is extended as being somewhat analogous to the way that uh, computers get knowledge, actually. And so this is a little bit tenuous, but I think there's something here. The idea of, that machine learning kind of works by, gobbling up as much data as possible, and then gradually improving results by recognizing, patterns to a greater, this is a very kludgy explanation, but recognizing patterns to a greater degree of efficacy in the data, and sort of getting that incremental improvement. Um, if you think of that being the way that you learn about the world, because that's the way an algorithm kind of learns about the world, or at least the world we give it through the data we provide. If you think that human scientists do a similar thing, then of course you should just kind of gradually extend the frontiers by kind of like learning more and adding to what you already know, and finding some little incremental improvements at the edges, and refining our knowledge as we sort of zero in on the most accurate possible picture of the world, or the particular phenomenon we're studying. But that is just an idea. Like, as in, that is just a kind of theory. That is one framework for how to understand knowledge and science. But a lot of people would say that's not actually how it works. The
Well,
way
I
that
mean, there's so
you,
many countless examples of any sort of innovators, and not just in science, but obviously, especially in science, we have the stereotypical person who's seen as insane working in their own space, or their own, in their own imagination land, constantly obsessed with something that nobody else can understand, and saying something that, the orthodoxy of society totally disagrees with and rejects, and, maybe it will imprison them for, or execute them for. There's just so many examples of exactly that, and it's hard to see that as being, taking the aggregate of information and incrementally extending it in a direction. It seems like a total unpredictable step shift. I mean, also the idea that uh, in order to attract funding, or attract legitimacy, or titles, or whatever it is that is going to attract a swell to your particular research, the fact that you need to get the approval of your peers before you even start it so often is insane to me. Like, imagine I don't know, as I mean, it could be because I'm coming as an artist, like the idea of, if you're sitting there writing a song, and then okay, we've started to get to the idea here. You know what we should do? We should get the most successful, recognized songwriters into the room to say, is this good or is this rubbish? Like,
yeah,
and as though they're going to know. I mean,
yeah.
it's absurd. I mean, the first thing that they should know is like, yeah, do whatever you want. I have nothing to do with this. That's what's going to make it the best. And potentially it's the same with science. I mean, it's probably the last person that I would want to mention on this podcast at all. Not last, but, bottom 10,000.
Mm,
Bill Bryson, in his short history
mm,
of nearly everything, I remember, it's just really stuck with me. He talks about the some wave of innovations coming through the men that worked in monasteries, because they were given sort of like across Europe in, I don't
yeah.
know, centuries gone by, they were given safety, food, lodging, plenty of time to sit around and think, and the sort of capacity to pursue whatever they want that came with that, because no one was coming and auditing them. So therefore, a lot of them went off and, wondered about how to improve something in the garden or improve something in whatever it might be. But that led to a large number of breakthroughs, and that really does sort of endorse the your crackpot friends idea of funding people to do kind of whatever they want, because it's not just about the initial idea and whether that deserves attention or not. It's also about the compound benefits of being able to pursue something for in your own way, rather than sort of the cyclical, oh, it's been 12 months now, I need to submit, why this is a
Yeah.
justifiable project. Like that would massively squeeze the shape of the type of thing that you're allowed to look at, and as a result, the type of innovations you were probably never going to see in some types of things.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because some projects will naturally lend themselves to a short time frame, and others will just require a huge amount of runway. Yeah, definitely. That's yeah, it's a good point. I guess one of those monks was Gregor Mendel, who like literally discovered how inheritance works. Like, I guess he didn't discover genes, but he discovered, with his pea plants and hybridity and stuff. Yeah, that's really good example. I, yeah, because I guess the alternate framing of how knowledge works is that, you are trying to, rather than just get an increasingly accurate picture of the world, you're trying to replace the current picture of the world, or the current picture of, again, whatever topic it is you're trying to understand, with a completely new picture that might be, hopefully superior in some way, because it, yields new benefits, or, unlocks new ideas or whatever. And so if you took that as the view of what kind of scientific discovery is, then the current system is uniquely bad at achieving that. And it is all optimized to just achieve the kind of incremental improvement thing. And, you know, kowtowing to your peers and trying to do what the most important people in the field would consider to be worthwhile, rather than challenging that orthodoxy at all. Maybe and I didn't think about it like that, but probably there probably is a closer analogy to artistic um, discovery or artistic creation than most people would want to admit. But that's because that would be seen as like, oh, science isn't that, you know,
Mm.
speculative or whatever. But it should be like it, 100% should be the case that the boldest and most creative ideas uh, should be rewarded somehow, because again, it's crazy. It's like the one kind of pattern we don't learn from is the pattern of scientific discovery through history, where invariably you've got people coming up with bold, new ideas that go against the grain or against the orthodoxy, that lead to discovery. So it is. Yeah, I don't know. Look, should there be compulsory history and philosophy of science courses for all scientists and funders of science? Yes. And, am I someone who's looking for a job in that area at the moment, purely by coincidence? Yeah, sure, that too. But I think that would be the most important thing to do.
I remember learning, and I'm not sure how accurate this was, but I did strategic studies at university, and we learned that 51% of scientific research and development in the 20th century was militarily driven.
Okay, yeah. That
And I'm sure there's like plenty of great spin-offs. I mean, and super glue is a famous one. Super glue was invented for the American soldiers in Vietnam, so they could quickly patch up their wounds.
I didn't know that
Um,
one actually. Yeah, right.
yeah, oh, yeah, right. What are some
Okay.
of the other famous ones? I mean, I guess all the rocketry stuff that,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
took us to the moon, or did
So
it?
it
Yeah.
is this an argument in favor of more military prioritization then?
No. I think an argument, it's like saying the sun should come up in the morning. Obviously, we need more military spending. Um, um, okay, so then I want to pivot to one interesting development in the landscape. It follows on from what we were talking about in our last episode that we spoke to each other, which was AI at the frontier of things.
Yeah.
And I remember reading a couple of weeks ago about, I think it was Google's DeepMind had specifically designed a structure of using their supercomputer AIs to conduct scientific experiments. And I can't remember exactly how they did it, but they had one sort of really powerful one formulating ideas, and then other ones to sort of test to refine what to look at and how to do it. You know about this?
I do. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Um,
it had some success immediately in was it bacteria? Oh, I can't
well,
remember exactly what it was, but I remember reading that the expert in the area was like, "Have you hacked my computer? Because this would take us months to do in a lab, and you've just done it in a minute."
yeah. Okay. Well, that's really interesting. I do know about that general project, and there are currently lots of um,
I bet.
people in parallel places trying to basically use AI to boost scientific research in some way. Yeah, actually this is a really good example because this probably dramatizes the difference between those two approaches to scientific discovery quite well, and could be good in a way. Now that I think of it, because it might be the case, and this is the cruelest thing ever to this poor researcher who's just had their work gazumped by a machine. But like, it could be the case that if um, some AI driven model with that kind of actor critic framework, where you've got one part of it proposing an idea and the other model, criticizing it, refining it, or whatever. It may be that whatever it comes up with is kind of possibly simulating what the human researchers were probably about to come up with relatively soon anyway, because it was some idea or discovery that was kind of latent in the existing knowledge that we have. Because if you look at any topic at the moment, and it could be some super subtopic in biochemistry or material science or whatever, there's just going to be like so much existing literature that even the world experts in that exact topic struggle to keep up with it every day, right? And so these AI tools are a fantastic booster to those people because they actually can just trawl the literature more quickly. And if it's the case that in the existing literature there's like some useful connections or some useful experiments which suggest themselves, that human researchers or their grad students more likely were about to kind of get to, um, maybe that's something where these AI models actually just like speed up or accelerate that process. But you might say that, well, that was kind of stuff that was going to get done anyway in the next couple of years, but now we've just done them in the next month instead, which is great. Like, that's fantastic use of AI. But again, that is arguably just doing the kind of incremental improvement thing and the refinement of existing ideas, rather than the bold leaps or the kind of big discoveries that are more important, the kind of black swans of scientific discovery that actually really advance understanding. And so then the natural question is, well, okay, will we have an AI that can do that thing? And I think in the current paradigm, that's going to be hard. Um, but I do think there is room for improvement of these AI systems, like the one that DeepMind is working on, simply because there should be like still quite a lot to do in that space of combining existing ideas and finding connections out there in the literature, or finding connections between some obscure study that no one really got to and what you're currently working on, or seeing an analogy between the experiment you're trying to run here in this subtopic that
I
is
mean, it's just
actually
so
similar.
it's so easy to think of any number of reasons why those connections wouldn't have been happened to have been made. You're probably in many fields. You're probably talking about a handful of dozens of people who even understand the frontier stuff, and then maybe some of them don't speak the Mandarin that it's been published in, or like or somebody had a personal crisis and couldn't follow. There's any number of reasons why those people wouldn't have the energy or time or faculty to make those connections. So it is exciting to have machines do that. But then, yeah, exactly as you say, it would be interesting to see the parallel universe in which we don't have access to these AI tools, and then what do we? Um, yeah, are we limited in the types of gains that we get, particularly as we, I imagine, come to depend upon them for certain types of work rather than, yeah,
Well,
and lose the
exactly.
skills to do stuff ourselves.
Well, yeah, totally. So this is where some people have talked about what they call Jevons paradox. I don't know if you've
Hmm.
heard. Yeah,
I
like
love
in
Jevons paradox.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, Jevons paradox.
yeah.
Yeah. So of course, I think the original example was coal power, maybe, or like whatever, some 19th
It's
century thing.
physical resources, yeah, in
Yeah,
the original example.
yeah. So the resource becomes cheaper. So you think, okay, great, people are going to kind of uh, sort of need less of that because that's now more efficiently gotten and you can have it for cheaper. But of course, when some resource becomes cheaper, people want more of it because now it's more available. It actually increases the amount of that resource being mined or being
As
Um,
someone who, just for a very small chapter worked in climate change policy stuff, I
right.
just couldn't scream it loudly enough at everybody that I ever saw talk about it, because there are so many programs that are purely designed to increase the efficiency of anything, and all. Yeah. So the paradox is that as you increase the efficiency of a resource's usage, you increase the rate at which that resource is depleted. Oil is another classic one. You would think, oh, our cars need half as much petrol as they did, 30 years ago or whatever. That's great. Surely we're all using less petrol, but of course, no, we're finding other things to do with all the oil, et cetera, or we're driving more, or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah,
Both
yeah.
of those things are true. Um,
Yes, totally. Yeah, no,
yeah,
thank you. That's a good encapsulation of it. So obviously that is happening currently with compute as a resource, but I can also see that happening with whatever you want to call it, scientific AI discovery or whatever as a resource. Like as that gets better, researchers around the globe are just going to use that more and more, and then the job will likely become how quickly you and your team can leverage the AI discovery process as much as anything else. Like that will, I guess, come to
and we
dominate.
potentially trap ourselves on tracks that are really limit the
Yeah,
capacity to come up with the very things that we absolutely need most.
yeah, 100%. And you're prey to what the philosophers call the problem of induction, which is that if you're just purely using the past as a guide to the future, when something that's never happened before happens, you are completely effed. And this is
Not
kind of
swearing on this
yeah,
this
I
holy
don't know why.
podcast.
I think effed carried more weight actually, if
Yeah,
anything.
yeah, yeah. More heft.
Um, yeah, so if your whole process of scientific discovery is set up purely to kind of leverage results that are based on past results and trying to over refine them, then you are guaranteed to a not be prepared for the future, and when new discoveries do come in, they won't match what you've been working on, and you're going to be less likely to actually branch out into new areas of discovery. So it's that look, again, you've talked me around here, Chris. Maybe there is a crisis in science that I hadn't even properly come to terms with, but that is actually a big one, which I hadn't thought of in these terms. But that general approach and over reliance on just um, building on past discovery is huge. But yeah, I guess I was thinking of that even maybe in broader terms about overall knowledge discovery, even extending beyond science. But it probably is. It's most acute in science where we want new technologies or new, health innovations or whatever it is. That's where it's most debilitating. Yeah.
Okay, this leads nicely to my, I think, most important question, because I know nothing about even how to ask it, let alone what the answers might be. And hopefully you've got a clean single sentence that'll that'll just shoot it through the heart. Is there, in the process and tools of science itself, a critical blind spot that means that there are things that we are just generally certain that we know being totally unprovable in certain realms?
Uh,
And if so, what are the things that would fit into that category?
yeah. Well, look, well, to go deep, I think one of them is, and I just want to preface this by saying, this will sound a little bit crackpot at the start, but
Great.
yeah. Um,
This is a safe space. This is not a peer-reviewed journal.
thank God. Oh, well, then you've misled me most direly.
There's also no funding.
Oh no. Um, so one candidate there would be the idea of uh, laws of science, or let's say laws of physics. So there's this famous quotation that you'll see in any like popular science book about physics or cosmology or anything like that, which says, that the second law of thermodynamics is the kind of gold standard. And if you have some idea that somehow contravenes the second law of thermodynamics, which is the one that says entropy is always increasing in a closed system, in other words, that the universe
No
will tend towards
perpetual
heat.
motion machines. That sort of
No
stuff.
perpetual motion. Yeah, that one. It says, if you have some idea that contradicts that, then throw it out. It's literally, it cannot possibly work. And I do think that the second law of thermodynamics is pretty solid. But if you start from the assumption that it is definitely locked in and that anything that somehow contradicts it must, therefore be wrong, I think you are setting yourself up for potentially a failure, and that is a kind of blind spot. And so that's the most sort of that's the most vaunted law of physics or law in science is probably the second law. But you go out from there. There are other laws or principles that we would consider to be, kind of inviolable or kind of like locked in because we've just absolutely discovered them, and they then set the agenda for what else can be discovered. Now, in physics, I'm not, again, the laws of physics are pretty solid. They've held up pretty well, and I don't expect that like 10 years from now, or maybe even 50 years from now, introductory physics textbooks will have a whole different set of laws or anything like that. But that kind of attitude is sort of replicated down in other disciplines in science where, arguably the laws are not really like laws in the same way that the law of thermodynamics, second law of thermodynamics is a law. And so if you take that mentality that you have these kind of axioms or laws to begin with, and then you try to make everything else fit that, you are guaranteeing that everything you do fits those axioms quite well. But you are also guaranteeing that if you got those wrong, or if anything was outside that or kind of orthogonal to that, you're operating with a massive blind spot. So I think that attitude is, again, which is kind of like a sort of philosophical thing that you don't really train scientists to think about this. And I'm not saying they should be trained, but like I think
But
that's a blind
potentially
spot.
it'd be good to train, or at least have the access to the opportunity to be trained in, say, for example, pre-quantum physics or pre-certain step shift breakthroughs.
Mm.
What were leading scientists who were publishing on things that were subsequently, completely debunked? What were they saying, and what were their thought processes,
Yes.
and how was that happening? Because I mean, I wouldn't, you said I would be surprised if in 50 years the physics textbook doesn't look sort of the same in its primary axioms. Like, it's hard to, I wouldn't want to take that bet, not because I think otherwise is true, but I just think, like, there's no end of people, extraordinarily intelligent people, cohorts of people, organizations being proven to look completely foolish, just because, particularly in physics, where the frontiers are so difficult to grapple with, and
Unintuitive, and
and
yeah.
inexhaustive.
Yeah.
Like, they're not exhaustive or necessarily, yeah,
Yeah.
coherent yet, which is, yeah.
Well, totally. And again, it's like that. It's that attitudinal thing where, like, surely, if you were a physicist or whatever, you should want
Yeah.
the textbook
Yeah.
of 50
Well,
years from now to be
yeah.
really different. Like that'd be great. That would mean that the discipline has learned something. Um, but like the other thing is that more that thought experiment you gave of like showing people like physics from pre-quantum era to show how people thought about it then, and then how their ideas were subsequently changed. I think that's really valuable exercise because I think there's a tendency to just like, again, particularly in physics, to assume that these that 500 years from now, when we're building spaceships to go to other planets and so forth, we will be building on the fundamentals that we've got in the textbooks right now. And so, when people do speculative fiction or think about like long-termist agendas, as they call them, they tend to think that, okay, well, we will have developed a whole bunch of new technologies by then, but it will all be based on our current understanding of science, which is the weirdest idea ever. And these people whose worldview is largely informed by sci-fi books that they read when they were teenagers should maybe read more sci-fi, because like it's because even, you know, you see the sci-fi books of the 1950s and how, the stuff they anticipated as some of it's kind of like been um, was a kind of good guess, but other things are just completely different because it turns out we discovered a lot of stuff in the intervening 70 years that rendered their predictions, irrelevant. And like it's such a sort of presentist bias. It's such a bias towards our present state of knowledge, which is completely natural. And it's easy for me to say, if I'm like, douchebag philosopher who just, is just kind of is interested in these little like critiques of the way other people think, rather than doing any thinking for myself. But like it is the idea that even, and I'll go on record here, that even the second law of thermodynamics, the idea that we won't have improved on that or modified that or found some exception to the current rule or whatever in 500 years is, I think, insane. And if that is like if that actually happens, it means that we have flatlined,
Yeah. You
in
had to
terms of
rewrite a lot.
discovery. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Another one, this the speed of light. I saw something once about we can't actually the measure it because for certain because we measure it
Okay.
halfway and then it comes back or something. Or I can't remember exactly what it was, but in theory, it could be like it's not a smooth and consistent thing. It could be,
Yeah,
oh my God,
yeah.
I'm way out of my depth here because I don't remember exactly what it was saying, but it was somebody who was mounting a case for, why we don't necessarily know that the speed of light is what we have it as.
Yeah, yeah,
I
totally.
mean,
No,
I just as a total no frontal cortex person, when in it's a university, I was always like, well, why is the speed of light a limit? Couldn't there be any number of things that we just don't understand that are occurring? I mean, especially when there's evidence of like spooky action at a distance and that sort of stuff. Like you know, um,
yeah,
anyway,
totally. I mean, yeah, again, this is like, I mean, okay, so what I was about to give like a whole bunch of caveats there, where I was going to say like, obviously, I think the speed of light's real and
no,
everything,
don't
blah
bother.
blah blah. But the instinct to give all those caveats and everything is kind of part of the
Yeah,
issue
yeah,
here.
yeah,
That
yeah.
like obviously, I don't want people to think I've gone all Unabomber or whatever. Uh, but then
I already think that
it,
of you.
it's but then it's like totally bizarre that you feel the need to like kowtow to the uh existing state of knowledge, and it's like, well, hang on, what the whole every you hear about all these stories like, wasn't Einstein brave to stand up to the existing orthodoxy or whatever, and then it's like, weren't the developers of quantum theory brave to stand up to the orthodoxy? And it's like, well, why do we have to pay so much you know obeisance to the orthodoxy now? It's almost like whoever's in power thinks they're good, and the ones who came before them weren't. It's yeah. It's but I find myself doing that automatically. It's kind of perverse, isn't it?
So, in addition to the sort of specific laws that may be overthrown, or um, how we set ourselves on a track and then everybody follows that track, and then it's assumed that that's a form of truth. Um, do you think that there are kind of like Gödel's incompleteness theorem style limits to what scientific uh, tools can determine?
uh,
Because I feel like the answer has to be yes, because otherwise you're operating under the assumption that, oh well, we just haven't had enough time or resources, or like
yeah.
the energy of intelligence directed in enough directions to understand absolutely everything exhaustively, and I just can't see the case for that
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah,
instinctively. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, I have a very, very long answer to that, which can't really be unpacked here. But like the yes,
I'm
and
sorry I asked.
it's really rude. But the part of it is that there's no. This will sound crazy, but like there's no science of knowledge yet, really. Like there's no actual theory of what knowledge is and how knowledge increases, or even how human brains increase knowledge. Like all that is all totally like up in the air, and there's like 10 different disciplines that have strong opinions on it, but I don't think any of them really have figured it out. So it must be the case that there are either limitations of that kind that we don't even know about yet, or that are inherent in what knowledge is, because we don't even know what like that's the thing. There's a great science of thermodynamics. There's a great science of organic chemistry. There's wonderful science of biology and living tissue, but there's no
The
science of
Milgram
knowledge.
experiment.
You can't get better than that, but except maybe Zimbardo, yeah. But
Yes, but
the but yeah. So and maybe on another occasion I can drill into to the kind of weirder parts of that, because I think it just comes down to a really fundamental a way that we project the way that we think onto the world, which is not the same as being how the world works, but because we think with a certain kind of thinking machine, the brain, we tend to think that uh, knowledge is this thing that is in our brains that can just kind of increase. But that's kind of like a weird way of thinking about it, particularly when we have things like artificial intelligences or machines that we're also trying to increase the knowledge of, or cooperate with in increasing knowledge. So it's like, well, is knowledge this thing that's inside our brains, or is it this external thing? And there's a whole there's a whole rabbit hole there.
Well, I tell you what, that's a really beautiful teaser because I hope that you will come back at some point and we can unpack this in a 17-hour episode that results
Yes.
in you going to prison.
Yeah.
Certainly academic prison if you're not already there.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm already kind of
Purgatory.
actually or at least Unabomber, in a cabin level. Yeah.
Can you
Writing
stop
my
saying Unabomber?
manifesto.
Because,
Like,
I'm trying to get some algorithm boosts here. Or keep saying it, one or the other.
maybe.
I'll put it in the title. All right. Thanks so much again, Jamie, for joining us. Really appreciate it. And thank you to all the listeners, especially to the Patreon patrons. If you want to join up and you're not already, Chris Andre is where you go over at patreon.com. Thanks, Jamie. I look forward to seeing you next time.
Definitely. Thanks, Chris.